On a dangerous and deserted island, a nun happened to meet an American soldier. The two became good friends. After spending many days together, one day some enemies also arrived on the island to kill them. But as the story unfolds, we will see whether these two companions can be separated or not. The movie opened with a boat drifting in the middle of the deep ocean, on the verge of sinking. Inside was a man in terrible condition. His name was Clark. He had been wandering at sea for many days, without food or water. Facing death, Clark prayed for a miracle, hoping that somehow he might spot land. After drifting for hours, Clark finally saw an island nearby. He began steering his boat toward it, and before long, he reached the shore. Afraid his boat might drift away, he tied it securely at the edge and hurried inland. He hoped there would be someone on this island who could help him. A short distance in, he saw a church. The sight puzzled him. Who could have built a church on such a deserted island? But then he remembered, even where men cannot reach, God is already present. When Clark reached the church, he saw a nun sweeping outside. The nun noticed him standing there, grew frightened, and began apologizing, thinking he was a thief who had come to loot. But Clark reassured her, "Don't be afraid, I'm not a criminal." Once convinced, the nun allowed him inside the church. As Clark entered, he noticed a grave nearby, but didn't ask about it. Inside, the nun introduced herself as Angelina. She explained that she had been living there for many years. Originally, she'd come with some companions to spread the faith and guide the locals who once lived there. But they didn't know the island was a base for enemies. When their group arrived, the locals were captured. By the time she and her senior father came to help, the people had already been taken away, never to be seen again. The father was devastated by this and fell ill, eventually passing away. Angelina herself had dug his grave and buried him. Since then, she had lived alone, with no rescue. Her people at the church probably assumed she had died as well. After hearing this, Clark began to tell his story. He said he was an American, traveling with his ship in the middle of the ocean, searching for something, but their ship was attacked by enemies. Luckily, he had managed to find a lifeboat and survived. He explained that the world outside had become very dangerous. Nobody cared about anyone's life anymore. Clark admitted he was amazed that she had survived on this island. The nun just laughed and gave no special answer. A little later, the two began searching for food together. Clark noticed some coconut trees nearby. He climbed up the hill and started picking coconuts. He handed one down to the nun who was standing below. On his way down, he also discovered a cave, but decided he would explore it another day and went back to the nun. The nun then pointed toward the sea, and Clark looked in that direction. He saw a turtle swimming, so he took the nun back to his boat. Together, they set out on the sea to catch the turtle. They followed it for a while, but catching it wasn't so easy. Clark jumped into the water, and after a tough struggle, finally managed to grab hold of the turtle. Afterwards, they prepared a meal and sat down to eat. During the meal, Clark told her that he had swum about 300 miles on the boat and never felt afraid in the ocean because he was sure he would eventually find some island. He went on to explain that he was an orphan and had lived in an orphanage for 14 years. After that, he decided to join the army so he could fight his country's enemies and bring honor to his homeland. The nun told him that she too was an orphan, but she had lived in a church since childhood. That's how she became a nun, and she found joy in guiding people onto the right path. As they talked, Clark tried to joke around with her, but the nun didn't really pay attention to his teasing. While they were still in conversation, they suddenly noticed an enemy plane flying overhead, searching for people on the island. They needed to hide immediately, so Clark told her about the cave he had discovered earlier that morning. They rushed up the hill and hid inside the cave. In this way, they managed to escape. After a while, they came back out to see what had happened, only to find that a bomb had been dropped on the church. The church and all of its belongings were completely destroyed. Clark was shocked at the sight. Everything was gone. Even his escape boat had been burned by the enemies. That meant he had no way of leaving the island anymore. The nun was heartbroken to see this. She told Clark that she would surrender herself to the enemies so that he could be saved. But Clark refused, explaining to her that doing so wouldn't solve anything. Instead, they would capture her and treat her horribly. That's why it was better for her to stay hidden. That evening, when darkness fell, Clark went down to the seashore to catch some fish. While he was fishing, he spotted a Japanese boat passing by. Because of that, he had to hide for a while. But when that didn't work, he covered himself in black mud and slipped into the Japanese camp. His danger wasn't over yet. While he was gathering food supplies inside the camp, a few Japanese soldiers sat down nearby. Clark had no choice but to spend the entire night there. Meanwhile, the next morning when the nun woke up, she saw saw that Clark still hadn't returned and she grew worried. On the other side, Clark carefully collected plenty of food and managed to escape from the camp, avoiding the soldiers. When the parade was happening inside the camp, the sound of a gunshot echoed. Hearing it, the nun laid her head on a rock and began to cry, believing Clark had been killed. She wept uncontrollably until suddenly Clark appeared. He comforted her, telling her that she should never have left the cave because Japanese soldiers could spot them at any time. After that, Clark led her back inside the cave and advised her never to come out again. A little later, he showed her the bag filled with food he had stolen for her. But seeing this, the nun grew anxious and said that if he ever went outside again, she wouldn't talk to him and she herself would leave too. Clark understood what the nun now felt for him. He promised her, "Alright, I'll never go out again." But after some days had passed, one day Clark brought her a flower and a comb, trying to flirt with her. The nun, however, still not thinking that way, kept the flower but refused to take the comb. Clark then asked her if she could renounce her vows as a nun. She explained that to do that, she would have to give up everything. She also told him that when someone becomes a nun, they are given 5 years to decide whether it's truly their path or not. Only after that period can they make the final choice. And for her, only 1 month remained before the 5 years were complete. Just then, they suddenly heard some noises. Clark went out to check and saw that the Japanese soldiers were leaving. Both of them felt overjoyed. At that moment, seeing the chance, Clark opened up his heart to the nun. He told her that he wanted to give her a flower every day and spend his entire life with her. He explained that he felt as if he had been given a new life, and that this gift of life made him happier than ever, so much so that he wished to live out the rest of it by her side. The nun then showed him a ring. Holding it up, she said it was a silver ring worn after swearing an oath before Jesus, and that after 5 years, when one becomes a full nun, they are given a gold ring. "That is our tradition," she said softly, "and I cannot abandon my position as a nun." Hearing this, Clark was heartbroken. He walked away and stood sadly at the seashore. The nun came to him there, and Clark told her, "Maybe your decision is right. After all, I'm a soldier. I'll always be at the border, and you may never even know if I'm alive or dead." The nun said nothing. The two of them simply returned to have dinner together. During the meal, Clark pulled out a Japanese drink. He shared it with the nun, but ended up drinking so much himself that he became drunk and started speaking nonsense. He got close to the nun, pouring out his feeling, but she didn't like it in that moment. Upset, she left the camp and decided to spend the night in the forest instead. The next morning, when Clark woke up, he realized the nun was gone. He couldn't remember what had happened the previous night. Worried, he set out to search for her. Deep in the forest, he found her lying unconscious. Her clothes were soaked from the rain. Clark lifted her and brought her back to the camp as best he could. Just then, he heard the footsteps of approaching Japanese soldiers. Quickly, he carried her to the cave he had discovered earlier. Because of being drenched in the rain, the nun had fallen ill and needed warmth. Clark went back to the camp to get warm clothes for her, but as he was stealing them, one of the soldiers spotted him. Clark was forced to fight and ended up killing the soldier. He dragged the body to the seashore and hid it there. Afterward, Clark carefully returned with the warm clothes, dressed the nun in them, and took care of her. It had been 2 days and Clark was still waiting for the nun to regain consciousness. Suddenly, the nun's eyes opened and she was surprised to see her clothes had been changed. She found Clark sitting next to her. Clark told her that he had found her unconscious outside and that she was in a very bad state, which is why he had changed her clothes. Clark apologized for it, saying he hadn't done it on purpose. After hearing this, the nun forgave him. A little later, they heard gunshots. Clark said to the nun that those people might have returned and that they needed to do something. The nun advised him not to go outside, but Clark didn't listen. He went outside and saw that everything was on fire. The Japanese had found their companion's body and were now looking for his killer. When Clark returned and told the nun about this, she started praying to God for him, but Clark decided that he would surrender himself to save the nun's life. The nun again told him not to do it, but at that moment, they heard some noises at the cave's entrance. It seemed that Japanese soldiers were standing outside the cave. Both of them were frightened inside. Then a voice from outside said that whoever was hiding in the cave should come out, or they would be forced to blow up the cave. Now Clark had no answer. He went back and sat down quietly. The nun also started praying. It seemed their end was near, but then voices started coming from outside again. It seemed that American soldiers had arrived and were fighting the Japanese. After some time, an idea came to his mind. If the Americans had come here, they would fall into the trap set by the Japanese soldiers and get killed. That's why he had to save them somehow. He went outside and saw that no Japanese soldiers were left. He started defusing the bombs one by one and finally went and turned off the main machine. After that, they were safe. A little later, the nun came outside and went close to Clark to tend to his wounds. nuns. Clark said that their end might be near and they might never meet again after this. But the nun said that she always wanted to keep him close to her heart because he had given her a reason to live here. You are and will always be my best friend. The two looked at each other with tears of love for the last time. Just then, American soldiers arrived. Clark asked one for a cigarette, then put it in his mouth. Clark was being carried away on a stretcher, and the nun was also walking behind him. Perhaps the nun had changed her mind, and with this incomplete story, the movie ends.